I don't know if those guys can hear me at the back.
You can? Perfect. So I'd like to first begin by acknowledging the lands that we are on. The land that we are on is the land of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lenape, and Adawandarum peoples, whose traditional lands we are gathered upon today. Similar to the indigenous people of this land, we are gathered for another group of people who are being displaced from their land, and that is the Palestinians in the Quds and elsewhere. And we're gathered here today, and you're here today because we're answering the call of Palestinian activists who have asked us to come put together for a month of action for Jerusalem. We're here today because they have spoken out and they've risked their freedom and their lives to speak out against an injustice. And we're here today to amplify their voices and to raise our voices here in Canada to help bring a solution to their problems. So this month, what we're asking for is that people come together not just for this rally, but continue to take action for the remainder of the month as part of a global movement to try to effect change wherever we can. Know that the Israeli courts are feeling the international pressure. We know this from the people within the courtrooms, and we know this from the multiple delays that have occurred in making this decision. We know that the pressure they are feeling is real, and that we have a duty to continue to apply that pressure and continue to pressure our governments to take action, to drop these cases, and to put an end to this ethnic cleansing campaign of the Israeli government. On our agenda today, we have some very powerful speakers who will come up, and hopefully they will inspire you with their words, and they'll show you that action can be taken and should be taken. We'll take a walk and we'll take a march around the park, and we'll use chants to express what we're feeling and what we're expecting our government to take action for. And we'll come together, hopefully that this is the beginning of a movement in the City of London to continue to make change as much as we possibly can. We may not be able to control everything around the world, but what we can control is how much we put into this effort here in London and how much pressure we apply to our MPs here in London and beyond. So I hope that this place will be the example for other cities of what they can do to continue to take action when a community comes together for a cause. Before we get into the speeches, I'd just like to start with a bit of housekeeping. So there are these signs that you may see other people holding. They say, "We stand for human rights, free Palestine, and ongoing Nakba." On it is also a QR code that people can scan with their phones, and it will lead to resources that explain to everybody what's happening in Palestine. So we ask that you take one of these signs, and you can put metal stakes into the bottom of it and put it in front of your lawn and have these displayed all around the city. We also have water bottles, hand sanitizers, and masks here. So if anyone would like any of those, please come up and grab one. Finally, you should have received a piece of paper that looks like this. Every person should have this piece of paper because it has important information about what you can do to ask your MPs about their actions here in this election cycle, and it has some information about what's happening in Palestine. So to get started in the first part of our program, I'd like to invite to speak Dimitri Lascaris. I am looking, Dimitri, for my introduction about you, and I'm patting my pockets, and I don't know where I put it. So give me 1 second to find it, and you can get ready and warm up your vocal cords. I've got it right here. So Dimitri's a lawyer, a journalist, an activist. He's originally from London, Ontario, but he now lives and works in Montreal. He currently represents Dr. David Kattenberg in a legal challenge to the use of Product of Israel labels on wines made in Israel's illegal settlements. Last year, Dimitri ran to be the leader of the Green Party of Canada. He finished second out of 8 candidates, losing on the 8th and final ballot. He's the co-founder of Green Left Canada, a new organization established to promote eco-socialism in Canada. Please join me in welcoming Dimitri to the stage. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. In 2002, dozens of states came together to sign what came to be known as the Rome Statute, a statute designed to give force to a legal regime against war crimes and crimes against humanity. And in that statute, for the very first time, the international community adopted a legal definition on consensus of the crime of apartheid. And this crime essentially has several elements, very simple to define them and to recognize them. One is a system of institutionalized discrimination, backed up, secondly, by inhumane acts. Thirdly, the domination by one racial group of another. And finally, the intention that this be permanent. The first people of international renown to look at the question of apartheid in Palestine were Professors Richard Falk and Professor Virginia Tilley back in 2017, and after meticulously examining the situation, they concluded that the evidence Israel was committing the crime of apartheid was overwhelming. That was their word, overwhelming. 2 years later, a renowned Israeli human rights lawyer, Michael Sfard, on behalf of the human rights organization Yesh Din, also analyzed the question of apartheid and came to the conclusion that Israel was committing apartheid, which is, by the way, the second worst crime against humanity, surpassed in severity only by the crime of genocide. Then a year later, another Israeli human rights organization, B'Tselem, looked at the question of apartheid and decided not only that it was being committed in the occupied territories, but that it was being committed from the river to the sea, even within the internationally recognized boundaries of Israel itself. And then finally this year, only months ago, Human Rights Watch, a US-based mainstream human rights organization, declared that Israel is committing the crime of apartheid. One need only cite one aspect of this apartheid regime to make the case that Israel is an apartheid state, and that is that in the occupied territories, the indigenous Palestinian population is subjected to Israeli military law, but the settlers who are there in violation of international law and who are committing or complicit in a war crime have the benefit of Israel's domestic law. And that's a huge difference. To give you one example, under Israel's domestic law, you can only be detained for 30 days without charge. Under Israel's military law, you could be detained essentially forever without charge. A military court can renew over and over again your detention without any criminal charge being brought against you. Just imagine you're in your own land, you're there legally, and you are being subjected to that unjust military legal regime. But people who are there stealing your land in violation of international law have the benefit of the due process protections under Israeli law. Ali Velshi of MSNBC, a mainstream journalist, said in May of this year as the bombs were raining down on Gaza, "It is laughable," that was his word, laughable, "that we are even debating anymore whether Israel is committing the crime of apartheid because it has become so painfully obvious that that is what it is doing." Now imagine today if we had before us a political candidate, in the elections coming up, we had political candidates standing on the national stage declaring their support and admiration for South Africa's apartheid Afrikaner regime. We all know that that candidate or those candidates would be treated like pariahs, not only by the vast majority of Canadians, but even by the political and media establishment. But the politicians who lavishly support Israel, and virtually every single liberal and conservative politician in this country does lavishly support Israel, are treated by the political and media establishment as legitimate candidates. But they are no more fit to hold public office than an open supporter of the Afrikaner apartheid regime in South Africa. This means that Mark Garneau is not fit to hold political office. Justin Trudeau is not fit to hold political office. Aaron O'Toole, Stephen Harper, Doug Ford, not fit to hold political office. Why? Because they are open and lavish supporters of a racist apartheid regime. And it's finally time that we treat them as the political pariahs that they are. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dimitri, for that explanation of the apartheid regime. Next up, we have Chava, who's joining us from Independent Jewish Voices. And we're very happy to be joined today by Independent Jewish Voices. We're very glad they're here. For those who don't know, Independent Jewish Voices is a grassroots organization grounded in Jewish tradition that opposes all forms of racism and advocates for justice and peace for all in Israel-Palestine. Independent Jewish Voices was the first national Jewish organization to endorse the Palestinian-led BDS movement. They continue to support and defend BDS, as well as to hold Canadian organizations accountable when complicit in Israeli oppression of Palestinians. So with that, I'd like to hand it off.
Thanks. Marhaba. I'm here as a member of Independent Jewish Voices because we want Palestinians to know you are not alone. Jews of conscience stand with you and will fight the regime until justice prevails. And let us not be simply ideological, let's get practical. In Silwan, in East Jerusalem, Palestinians are being dispossessed. So what can we do here in London to let people know that we are opposed to their actions? The first thing is that there are 3 organizations involved in the immediate dispossession of Palestinians. There's Ateret Kohanim, there's Elad, which is a settler organization, and there's also the Jewish National Fund, and their subsidiary Himnuta. And because the Jewish National Fund has been receiving opposition from other Jews, they're now saying, no, we're not involved, it's Himnuta that's doing it. But Himnuta is also the Jewish National Fund. So, first you should know that there's a local Jewish National Fund office in Huron and Adelaide, not that far from here. So perhaps we could have some representation, opposition, to let the locals know how we feel. Second of all, there's a boycott which has targeted Puma, Pillsbury, Hewlett-Packard, and a large number of other organizations. So do not buy articles made in a regime that practices apartheid. Also, our local IJV office has written to Costco because Costco remarkably sells a large number of produce that says made in Israel. So grapefruits and oranges and dates, none of which specify whether they're grown within the 1948 borders or in the West Bank settlements. So IJV wrote a letter to Costco complaining that these products are being sold in their store. Costco didn't want to answer us, and they gave us a platitude that said something like, well, we want to cater to all the customers. So those of you who shop at Costco, maybe you want to say, we don't want to see these Israeli products in our stores. It's something else that we can do locally to express our opposition to the regime. Thank you all very much, and good luck.
Thank you very much, Harlow, for giving us some day-to-day examples of how we can all make change. I'd like to invite up David Heap. David is a dear friend to the Palestinian community in London and abroad. He's joining us today on behalf of People for Peace London and Canada Boat to Gaza. Canada Boat to Gaza is part of the Freedom Flotilla Coalition, an international grassroots coalition that has been sailing to challenge the illegal and inhumane blockade of Gaza for more than 10 years. Please join me in welcoming David.
Thanks, Basil.
I know a few people when we got here today expressed their disappointment at the numbers. It's not as big as when we had a car rally earlier this year. I want to remind you about what a Dutch pacifist pastor in the States said once, and he was one person protesting in front of the White House against the war in Vietnam, and somebody said, "You really think you're going to change your country protesting as one person?" He said, "No, I'm not here to change my country. I'm here so that my country doesn't change me." That's one person. We're more than one person today, and we know we will be more than the number we are in the future. That takes organizing. We will be more in the future. But it's important that our country doesn't change us and that we eventually change our country's position. The t-shirt you probably can't read. It says in a few languages, "I will not be silent." My son pointed out that I don't really need a t-shirt to tell people I never shut up. It's an occupational hazard of my workplace. University teachers talk a lot. But that's not what's interesting. What's interesting is in 2010, a group of us led a group, took part in the first Freedom March to Gaza. We didn't get to Gaza, we got to Cairo. Cairo, I came away with a better t-shirt. It only has 2 languages. It has English and Arabic, and it has 1 more letter in each pronoun. It doesn't say, "I will not be silent." It's a much more important message. It says, "Lan nasmut," which is, somebody help me with the Arabic. We will not be silent. Sorry, louder, please. We can almost hear her, but I'm a language teacher, so I'm going to make you all repeat that. We will not be silent.
We will not be silent.
Okay, that's good, but you know, language teachers like a lot of repetition. It's reputed to be the mother of learning is repetition. So, once more, Lan nasmut.
Lan naskut.
We will not be silent.
We will not be silent.
Okay, so the point is they have to hear you up at Hyman and Richmond at MP Peter Fredescato's office. We will not be silent.
We will not be silent.
Canada is complicit with the displacement of Palestinians in East Jerusalem. We will not be silent.
We will not be silent.
Okay, so the other thing about that t-shirt, small history lesson, when the students with that group that went to Cairo, this was before there was an SPHR on campus, and they said to me, "David, we would like to do Israeli Apartheid Week at Western. We're not sure that we can." Those same students went with us to Cairo. They saw hundreds of international activists sitting in Tahrir Square. This was in January 2010, a year before the Egyptians did it properly. It was like a little dress rehearsal. When we came back, they said, "David, it doesn't matter whether they let us do it. We're going to do Israeli Apartheid Week at Western." So they did the first Israeli Apartheid Week at Western, and we've been continuing it. Hopefully we will continue it in the future. So those students learned that very important lesson. We will not be silenced. There are many ways to speak up. I'm very happy that the CPSA has brought those flyers. I picked up an earlier version of it at the picnic last week. Somebody mentioned talking to your MPs. Don't just talk to your MPs. Talk to everybody who contacts you during the election period. It is their job to take down notes. I can guarantee you, because I've been that person on your doorstep or the person at the phone bank, their spreadsheet does not have a field that says concerned about Palestine. I know. It's not an issue for them. Our job is to make it an issue for them by not being silent. We can put that field there. If one of us does it, it's not going to happen. If a few of us do it, they might notice. If hundreds of us say Palestine matters, why are you opposed to this government purchasing Elbit drones? Are you opposed to the Canada-Israel Free Trade Agreement? If all of us raise that question, and if all of our friends do, then not just the MP, but all of the political parties have to take note. It will end up in their spreadsheet. Trust me, they count these things at the end of the day, and they will have to take a position. Okay, the bad news is we're not going to like their first position. The first position will be some kind of political weasel words trying to sound nice but not saying what we need them to say. So then we need to come back and say, "Sorry, you didn't hear us. We're going to repeat. We will not be silent." But a little louder. We will not be silent. Now they need to hear you down on commissioners at Kate Young's place and even over at Dundas and Second at Linda Mathis's, okay? You can ignore, for now, Karen Vecchio and London Elgin Fanshawe. The Conservatives are particularly slow learners on this, but let's make sure that these two parties at least hear us. We will not be silent.
We will not be silent.
So during the election period is an especially good time because you can raise it with, and I guarantee you, you will be contacted by phone or on your doorstep or both during the campaign. Raise it often. Not just you, all of your classmates. all of your friends, your co-workers, your neighbors. Raise the issue with them. So take the extra flyers and distribute them to your friends, colleagues, co-workers, classmates, and say, raise the issue. Bring up the issue of Palestine every chance you get. You know, you might not think you have a chance, but you know what? The other reason for this, and for this, it's not just because I'm a fashionista who needs accessorizing, okay? My son, the same son, will tell you that's a hopeless cause, clearly. This is a conversation starter. This is a conversation starter. The button that says end the occupation, end Israeli violence, independent Jewish voices is a conversation starter. People say, are you a Jewish, independent Jewish voice? I'm not, but I know some. Would you like to talk about it? That's a conversation starter. Start the conversations about Palestine and don't let them stop. Continue the conversations. As Chava says, when you shop, raise the issue. Raise the issue with Costco that we don't like where they're purchasing. Raise the issue with Reimagine Co. Wave, you know. Reimagine Co., London's first apartheid-free zone business, who have these same signs prominently displayed up at Piccadilly at their shop. Raise them positively with businesses that are supporting us, and raise it in a friendly way as concerned consumer with businesses that, like the politicians, need to be educated, because we will not be silent. I think we had enough repetitions, but just to be sure, they need to hear you in Ottawa and in Washington and in Tel Aviv. We will not be silent.
We will not be silenced.
Until freedom, liberation, and return, we will not be silent.
Thank you very much, David. David always has a great way of getting the crowd excited. And we will not be silent. Will be etched in our minds and our hearts for a while. David reminded me about two things I was thinking about there, is freedom and hope. And that then reminded me of a poem, and has now become a song by an artist by the name of Mustafa the Poet. And he has a song called Stay Alive. And in that song, he has a really beautiful verse where he says, and if they take it all away, our freedom in our hearts and that glow in your face, I'll remind you who you were yesterday. And I think it's really beautiful that he says that, because when we organize these things, and myself, I've, in my relatively short life, have been consistently protesting for this cause since I was as long as I can remember. And those that are older than me know that as well. And there are times where we feel like our efforts are not being heard. And we feel like sometimes we've signed a petition and we've gone out and protested and we've talked to our MPs. And we feel that we're stuck in this rut where nothing is really changing. And then comes along someone like David and someone like Dimitri and someone like Chava, and they inspire us and they remind us who we were yesterday. So when that freedom in our hearts feels low and that glow in our face is diminished, we look to people like that to uplift us again. And so I ask you here today, if you're here and a friend of yours isn't here because they said, you know, we've been to a bunch of protests and nothing worked, or we've signed the petitions and nothing worked. It's on you now to be that second part of the poem and remind them of the freedom that was once in their hearts, and remind them of the glow that was once in their face, and encourage them to continue taking action just as you have taken action today, not just by your words, inspire them by your action. And so as we get started through this walk now, I ask that you raise your voices for Palestine, and I ask that you make some noise for Jerusalem. Grab a sign, grab a water bottle, and we'll meet up here on the side to get ready to go. Thank you all very much.